The Philippines have become infamous for the prevalence of extrajudicial killings, the killing of an individual by governmental authorities without sanction of legal process. Since Rodrigo Duterte, president of the Philippines, assumed office in June 2016, his presidency has been synonymous to his war on drugs, a large-scale crackdown on drug traffickers and addicts. Duterte views drug dealing and addiction to be a major hindrance to the Philippines' socioeconomic progress. Therefore, not long after his inauguration, he endorsed the public to go ahead and kill drug dealers and addicts, and to top that, promised to kill them all, leading to vigilante attacks and police-engaged sweeps. Whilst police records show 6,000 over deaths, Human Rights Watchdog counts over 20,000 more, exposing the measures taken to dilute the severity of the situation. Extrajudicial killings impact multiple facets of security. Security is the ability to protect against threats to vital interests and values. Drug dealers and addicts' fundamental sense of security, their personal security, is being impacted because they have no means to protect themselves or interests that are imperative to their livelihood. Duterte's blanket endorsement fails to accommodate for different needs, for instance, providing an alternative to drug dealing so that they can sustain their livelihood. Additionally, the personal securities of third parties, the countless children and families whose lives have been devastated due to the death of their breadwinner, face both psychosocial trauma and economic hardships. However, these killings work to ensure national security from social and economic instability. Therefore, we are made to consider, to what extent have the extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, due to Duterte's war on drugs, led to an imbalance between personal and national security? The violation of personal security is in and of itself a violation of human rights. Human rights are the universal, indivisible, inalienable rights which all human beings are entitled to by virtue of their humanity. Article 3, right to life, liberty, and security, and Article 10, right to fair trial, are both being violated. Both these rights fall under first-generation human rights, which advocates for civil and political rights, therefore arguably the most basic and fundamental. They're also called negative rights, which require non-interference, often expressed as freedom from. With the blanket endorsement increasing the susceptibility of unjustified deaths, it is freedom from their personal securities being threatened, and likewise it is freedom from a killing without sanction of judicial proceedings. Such arbitrary deprivation of life begs to question whether extrajudicial killings are justified at all. Justice is the concept of fair treatment based on an agreed and accepted set of laws. Apart from questioning the concept itself, injustice is evident through the silencing of those who tried to speak out against it. Until today, Senator Lila de Lima remains detained for supposed drug trafficking, coincidentally after she initiated an investigation on the crackdown. Many regard her detainment as a ploy orchestrated by Duterte's government in order to curtail opposition. Duterte's resistance to retaliation is not one of isolation and even goes beyond Philippine borders. In July 2019, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, in July 2019, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution sponsored by Iceland on behalf of 38 other states requesting a report on the human rights situation in the Philippines, effectively condemning and enforcing accountability through international pressure. Duterte's administration responded by suspending all negotiations on financial assistance from those supporting countries. A wider relevance to right-wing populism can be made. Right-wing populism combines right-wing ideologies, characteristically conservative views, with populist rhetoric and themes, which seek to appeal to the likes of ordinary people who feel disenfranchised by an elite establishment by speaking on their behalf. Duterte's war on drugs appealed to the socio-economic outcry of the public. Through leveraging right-wing populist movements to seize power, Duterte began dismantling institutions that served to check authority and protect human rights. Therefore, although Duterte was elected by the people and maintains popularity, his governance has been associated with authoritarianism, where one individual has overwhelming power without safeguards. This allows them to potentially abuse their power, justifying violations of human rights in the name of national security. This is resonant in other countries, for instance, including Turkey, where President Erdogan had shifted from a model of democratic political Islam to one more characteristically authoritarian by using a counterterrorism campaign to crack down on dissent. Therefore, under both Duterte and Erdogan's rule, they've allowed and permitted structural violence to take place. Structural violence is when forms of power physically or mentally harms individuals or groups. Duterte's administration undermines the physical well-being and security of drug dealers and users, where perhaps fairer alternatives are possible, but they also perpetuate a lens that distorts perception, exaggerating class differences. By ostracizing drug dealers and users as a group, it alienates them from society, appropriating hostility to become the dominant discourse. Therefore, the structural violence inflicted by Duterte's administration drives cultural violence, which are harmful mindsets and beliefs that are embedded within all levels of society. As established by Johan Galtung, Galtung's violence triangle presents structural and cultural violence as the intangible basis of the triangle, only with the potential to instigate direct direct violence, which is violence through direct action as seen through the extrajudicial killings. Regardless of whether it's implicit or explicit violence, all three types have the ability to endanger one's sense of personal security. One could question Duterte's legitimacy in all this. An act or action holds legitimacy when they're commonly considered acceptable, usually by conforming to agreed laws and democratic principles. The blatant use of violence, his response to international concern, but also the brutish rhetoric to which he expresses his retaliation, have all led to the decrease in his legitimacy in the eyes of the general international community. In February 2019, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, launched a preliminary examination of the crackdown. Duterte responded by insulting the ICC, threatening to arrest the ICC's chief prosecutor if she ever entered the Philippines, and effectively withdrew from the Rome Statute, the ICC Establishment Treaty. However, countries such as the US under the Trump administration and other Asian governments have expressed either implicit or explicit support, thereby providing a form of legitimacy. Duterte's internal legitimacy within Filipino borders, however, is maintained because he was the only candidate to provide a solution to the prevalence of drugs, a long-time frustration amongst the urban poor. In September 2019, the government cited an 82% satisfaction rate for the drug war, pushing back on a UN resolution wanting to investigate for human rights abuses. What continues to peddle this situation is our Filipinos' apparent willingness to overlook the death toll so long as their individual economic and political needs are satisfied. Although Duterte enjoys popularity amongst wealthier Filipinos, his popularity amongst the poorest respondents have decreased, therefore suggesting that his campaign has concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. This demonstrates that the poorest citizens are being targeted, thereby satisfying the middle class, who are pivotal in deciding election outcomes. Benefits are therefore circulated amongst the wealthiest, perpetuating intra-country inequality in the Philippines. Intra-country inequality is defined as being a quality of being unequal or uneven within a country. In relation to the crackdown, intra-country inequality manifests itself in the dichotomy between the richest and the poorest through social disparity, which is when there's a difference between the overall economic asset and quality of life. However, surveys cited by Amnesty International expose that the mood seems to be shifting. Filipinos fear for their families' lives and would prefer due process as opposed to summary execution. A wider relevance to a lack of social equity can be made, which is when those with the lowest social statuses are affected most disproportionately. As the poor becomes poorer, they have even less capacity to voice their struggles, simultaneously allowing the voices of the rich to dominate. One could question whether this creates a system in which it's impossible to improve from the social class you're born in because opportunities aren't being facilitated. It fails to promote inclusive growth, which is a concept that advances equitable opportunity with benefits incurred within every section of society. Low levels of inclusive growth happen in both developing and developed countries, for instance, Indonesia and the UK, where they have dual economies, which are two separate economic sectors within one country, divided by different levels of development and technology. Drug dealers and users aren't able to ensure their personal security, thereby impacting the legitimacy in their collective voice, and also making it almost impossible to improve from the social class they were born in and emerge drug dealing with stability. Despite this, not many things will change, seeing as though authoritarian strongmen are unlikely to speak out against other authoritarian strongmen, and actors in the international community would prefer to reap the benefits of being allies with the Philippines rather than criticize their actions. Additionally, if the international community were to intervene, it would be an infringement on the Philippines' national sovereignty. States are sovereign when they're able to exercise supreme control within their borders. In the Sovereignty Wars, Stuart Patrick discusses that there are three core elements of sovereignty: authority, autonomy, and influence. By intervening, it would be infringing on Philippine sovereignty as authority and their internal sovereignty, which are both the exclusive and legitimate right to make rules but also govern themselves independently. Still, one could consider whether respecting state sovereignty is worth turning a blind eye to those whose personal securities are being stripped away. This case study is a prime example of security because it explores the nuance and complexity in balancing national and personal security. Because Duterte believes in securing national security and he has intentions of staying in power, it is unlikely that the voices of the international community will persuade his ethical consciousness. Although controversial, the truth behind drug dealing and addiction in the Philippines validates how counter efforts do need to be set in place. However, prioritizing national security at the expense of personal security threatens long-term negative impacts to the securities of drug dealers and users, but also numerous unintended third parties. Thank you.